Have you ever watched a change initiative roll out and thought, this could have worked if people actually felt like they were part of it? Welcome back to Unboxing OD, the podcast where we talk about what organizational development looks like in real workplaces with real people and real constraints. I'm your host, Kenneth Pearson, and today I'm joined by Dr. Jason Guttadauria, also known on LinkedIn as Dr. Irrelevant, and that nickname has a story you will want to hear. Jason and I dig into what it takes to move from change as a one-time event to change as a system. We talk about why change tends to stall after the insights are delivered, how leaders can build buy-in without turning everything into a top-down mandate, and what it looks like when teams own the work because they helped shape it. We also get into the popular 70% of change fails myth and why clinging to it can quietly sabotage the very outcomes leaders say they want. So if you've ever been asked to lead change, support change, measure change, or clean up the mess after change, this conversation is for you. So let's jump in. Welcome, everybody. I want to welcome Dr. Jason Guttadauria, PhD, aka Dr. Irrelevant, which we're going to talk about here in just a moment. Jason is the founder of JSG Advisory LLC, a consulting practice that helps organizations listen better, act smarter, and build workplaces that work for everyone. With a background in industrial organizational psychology and over a decade of experience in people analytics, talent strategy, and organizational change, Jason brings a data-informed yet deeply human approach to improving the employee experience. Before launching JSG Advisory, he led employee research and transformation initiatives at firms like Genpact, Gartner, and Mercer, helping leaders translate feedback into meaningful, measurable action. Today, his work focuses on creating systems that make listening continuous, not episodic, and enable employees and leaders alike to take ownership of positive change. And Jason, I am so excited to have you on the show today. We've been going back and forth a little bit and had some great conversations. So I want to welcome you and really thank you for your time today.
Absolutely, Ken. I know it's been a long time coming. We've had a lot of back and forth. I'm super excited. I've done LinkedIn live sessions. I've obviously done some teaching, but I've never done a podcast before. So this is a nice bucket list item for me. So I appreciate it. Super excited to get into it.
Excellent. And we are going to start with the Dr. Irrelevant story because it's me as a football fan. I understand like the draft process. I understand that the last player that's picked in the draft is Mr. Irrelevant. So I'd love for you to kind of tell the listeners a little bit about that story and what it means to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. Yeah, so the Dr. Irrelevant persona. Yeah, so for anybody who's like, following me on LinkedIn, not a plug to do that, but if you wanted to, I'm there. But on LinkedIn, I kind of leaned into this persona on Dr. Irrelevant, and the story behind it is essentially what you said. It's very related to the NFL draft, right? So how it came about is on my PhD graduation ceremony. By some very bizarre, very strange kind of coincidence, I ended up being the absolute last person to walk across the stage. Now, if anybody's been in part of like a graduate degree ceremony, we're talking people sitting there for 4 hours, going through every school, every program, right? And somehow I'm the last person to walk across stage. So at this point in time, nobody cares about Jason, right? They are all just get this done. Let's get home. So my cohort that I'm sitting with, right? These are peers of mine who are graduating from the PhD program at Hofstra at the same time, obviously applied organizational psychology. Big shout out to Hofstra University. So my cohort starts joking with me and they're like, hey, you're Dr. Irrelevant. You're the last guy in the draft, right? And it became this kind of silly little jab between like the in crowd, where every time I would meet with these folks afterwards at like PsyOp or other conferences or other gatherings, they'd be, hey, Dr. Irrelevant's here, right? But where it kind of solidified into an actual persona was through work, right? So I started my career in organizational assessments, right? Consulting, worked my way into other different places. And throughout my career, I experienced the different atmospheres, some atmospheres that were like absolutely 100% really bought in on this concept of industrial organizational psychology, where they hired other IO psychologists, right? We had peer cohorts within the organization, and we were able to sit down with one another, brainstorm, talk about the research, and like really jive, right? And then I worked at some other places where that was the exact opposite. And I'm sure other people, can relate where you walk in with this degree and there's a stigma associated with it. Um, whether it's true or not. You come out of the gate and you're kind of battling against these preconceived notions of what the degree means and how you as an individual are going to react because you have it. And that was never me, right? So to battle kind of that stigma was to kind of assume this persona of Dr. Irrelevant, but to kind of like use it and weaponize it and kind of deflect against, hey, like don't focus on the PhD at the end of my name. You brought me on to help you with something, right? Let's focus on the work, right? Let's focus on, right? Like, don't worry about too much about like what it means and how I got here, right? Let's, deflect, right? The degree is like for, irrelevant. What's relevant is the research, the work, right? The rigor that I bring to the table. So it's like, forget about this irrelevant thing if that's what you're nervous about, and let's focus on how to move forward together. So it became a thing that I leaned into rather than a joke that became a jab. It was more something that I just kind of owned and made um, part of my identity. And I'm happy I did because like now people recognize me. Hey, Dr. Relevance here. Somebody recently referred to my writing style as irrelevantly relevant, which I loved. But yeah, thanks, Ken. I mean, like that's I would encourage anybody to kind of lean into things like that if they can, if it's applicable to them.
Yeah, we could talk for hours on that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
and but I love it because I remember like the one of the first times I like we kind of linked in on LinkedIn, but kind of linked together. I saw
Yeah.
the Dr. Relevant. I was like, I got to know that story, man.
Yeah.
It's just, and I love that. So I love that you lean into it, because really, I mean, I agree with you. Like our degrees are, our degrees. I mean, yes, they have prepared us for a number of different things that we're doing, but it doesn't define necessarily who we are. We just
Right.
have maybe some formal background or formal education. We have some formal training, and I
Yeah.
love that you kind of lean into that. As the it just depends on the scenario. Like the PhD or the MS or whatever is really irrelevant to what we're looking to accomplish because we
Exactly.
still, yeah, we can talk about concepts and this that we learned, but in everyday practitioner world, sometimes they don't translate. It's what I learned in my psychology of leadership helped me because I have a little bit of like a background to it. It might not apply to the organizations that we're working for. So I love
Right.
that, man. I love
Yeah.
the leaning into it. So thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that story
Yeah, I mean, the way
and
to think about it is like, at the end of the day, we just found something we're passionate about, and we decided to lean into that, right? People do that all the time in different ways, different capacities, right? Mine just
yeah.
kind of, the two of us, right? Ours just kind of ended in this degree, you know, for better or worse, but a lot of people, are still kind of, picking up in the mainstream fashion. But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I totally get it. So, appreciate that story. So actually, let's get a little bit into some of the conceptual things and some of the things that you've been working on. Um, so you've led people analytics and transformation efforts. Some of the biggest names out there, kind of what we mentioned before. So Genpact, Gardner, Mercer, and now you run your own firm.
Yeah.
So looking back, what keeps pulling you toward this intersection of research, leadership, and then real world change?
Yeah, I love it, Ken. I've had this discussion quite a bit. To me, it was always kind of a natural progression. So, like I alluded to before, right? Started my career working for a small boutique consulting firm specialized in organizational assessments, onboarding, exit, 360, employee engagement was really our bread and butter. Um, and when you're working in a consulting capacity like that, right? It's every day, every month, every week, you're working with a different client, right? Assessing their needs, uh, helping them assess it, analyze, packaging up the insights, and providing those action recommendations to the leaders, the stakeholders to help satisfy whatever research questions they're coming to the table with. But you do that for like 5, 6 years, right? And if you're anything like me, you start to get the itch where it's like, okay, why am I seeing the same clients return year over year? great for business, right? Great for business. But like when you're a young up and coming practitioner, you start to wonder, like, is there something I'm doing wrong? Right? I thought these insights were pretty sound. I thought the action recommendations were practical, reasonable, right? But what keeps them coming back? Why aren't they taking action on these things that we are recommending, right? Even when we're coming to the table and providing support, and helping them execute. So after about 5, 6 years of that, you start to get the itch, right? And the natural progression there is like, okay, how can I get a better understanding of the barriers internal to making these things a reality? So that was the next step of my career was moving from an external consultant to what I consider more an internal consultant. So I started taking jobs where my one client was the one employer that I worked for, right? Usually sat in a people analytics function. I eventually worked my way up to, for a short amount of time, leading my own small people analytics function, which was fantastic. Um, and you get that, through the course of my career, you kind of get, you're satisfying that itch, like, all right, now I get it better, right? Now I'm not just this external consultant looking from the outside in, helping you uncover the insights. Now I'm kind of helping you understand those insights and take action on it. It wasn't until I found myself in the chief of staff position that like the rubber really hit the road, where it's like, oh, now we're in operations, right? Now we're really taking that big leap from uncovering insights to now practically how can we help the business turn that into reality. And that's where I got the real fast crash course into working with procurement, working with all these other supporting functions, finance, yearly budgets, and workforce development, and like everything. And that's when everything started coming together, right? It's not just about the insights. Some people are absolutely 100% content working their entire career with just on that side. Let me just help uncover these insights, and it'll be somebody else's job to now take that, pick out what's meaningful, pick out what's practical, and turn that into reality. That was never me. I always wanted to be that full service, more well-rounded practitioner, and that's kind of what guided me throughout my entire career at this point.
Yeah, I know with the practitioner portion. So I'm more of a practitioner than I am a researcher. So I
Yeah.
completely understand where you're coming from too. So the perception of consultants that come in, that they, it's all good that they have theory and they have, like this practice and stuff, but what does it really mean to my business? What does it really mean? Like they can give us all the theory that they want and all the research that they want, but what does it mean to the real world
Right.
experience? What does it mean, when you say working with chief of staff and then as chief of staff, and then all of a sudden now you're having to know, like, the finance department and this department and all the other functions that go along with it. Like, what does it actually look like? And that's why I
Yeah.
think like your approach in there, the research practitioner approach is so important, especially in the consulting world, especially as outside consultants working internally within organizations. Because yeah, again, we can make all the recommendations that we want, but how does it really apply to um, how does it really apply to that business? What are we learning about the business prior to walking in and consulting,
Yeah.
prior to providing those recommendations? And again, going back to that Dr. Irrelevant, we have the knowledge, but do we have the real world application capabilities
Exactly.
to be able to work with a variety, a different sectors. I work across many different sectors, and every single one of those businesses that I work with is uniquely their own business. So it's important for us to recognize that, and I love that approach. The being thrown into the practitioner realm, and people analytics is great, and it tells its own story, but then
Yeah.
applying the story that it's telling us. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
One piece
great.
that we didn't touch on is the individual experience too, right? We're psychologists, right? I don't know. I assume, right? We're kindred spirits. We got into this work because we want to make things better for the individual, right? And it wasn't until I really kind of landed in those chief of staff positions where I actually got to see and interact with the people who were going to be impacted by some of these changes, some of these initiatives
Yeah,
that we were trying to push forward, getting their insights.
for me, for the same thing, for the reason why I've done it, gotten into this work is I've experienced really great workplaces, and I've experienced really poor workplaces, and I know that it's not a one size fits all approach to it, but there's approaches, there's ways that we can make the employee experience better. And
Yeah.
so that, I mean, we, I always, I have no research on this, but I'm going to say that a majority of people, a lot of people, they don't necessarily want to be at work. They
Yeah.
want to be doing something else. They want to be, maybe home with their families, or they want to be out traveling, or they want to be doing, pretty much, what work pays for, like
Yeah.
most people. But I said, so my goal has always been to, how do I make the time that they're there, how do I make it manageable for them, and
Yeah.
how do I make it so that when they leave work, they're not, let's say they have a bad day, they're not bringing that home with them, where it impacts the areas that they really want to be a part
Yeah.
of. How am I making it so that it's not like that every single day? So I'm passionate about organizational psychology and organizational development, and all of that, and how it impacts the employee from the front line all the
Yeah.
way up to CEO or board of directors or council or whomever. So across the entire organization.
Absolutely can. Yeah.
So yeah, so let's talk a little bit now. So you shared a powerful story about supporting a newly hired CMO through a non-traditional change process.
Yeah.
Can you kind of walk us through that moment, how the approach differed, and what surprised you along the way?
Yeah, so now we're right, so we talked a bit about my career, right? Yeah. Um, and when I talked about kind of transitioning from insights generation, all the way through to change management is really kind of, the natural progression of my career took me. So this is a particular example. We had a new, I was already working as a chief of staff for, close to, a little over 3 years at this point, in my previous employer, supporting a different leader. There was some transitioning happening in the leadership there, and we had a new chief marketing officer join. Brilliant marketer, with a real wonderful vision on how they wanted to enhance the marketing organization. So my name came up and said, "Hey, Jason's kind of in a bit of a transition point. He's been doing great work over here in the data and analytics side, supporting our global head of, data and analytics as his chief of staff. Um, you know, he can work with you, right, to help you satisfy this transformation agenda that you have." I'd like to say that I came in and was like, the strategy and the structure was all mine. It wasn't the case, right? I came in more as to help execute on this. But the strategy is what really kind of resonated with me as something that like I now take to other places, other clients also. Because the CMO, she came in and was like, here's this vision, right? We are going to, get um the direct reports aligned with this vision, have them co-create along the way. Um, and it turned into this big, robust undertaking. I think it was like at the end of the day, it was like 8 interconnected work streams, all focused on different aspects of the marketing organization, operations and effectiveness, right? How are we using Gen AI? Anything we needed to think about from an onboarding or, experience, right? Culture experience, things like that. So it's like 8 different interconnected work streams, all that kind of started as a top-down initiative. Like, here are things that I want to target, but all pinpointing specific pain points that were bubbled up from the direct reports. Um, so, people talk all the time about like top down versus bottom up, bottoms up approach. In this particular example, yes, it started top down, right? Where I came in and started working with the direct reports, gathering their insights, right? Started talking with the direct reports of the direct reports, like the people actually doing the work, right? Say, hey, here's the strategy. Here's what we think is happening. Can you validate that? Right? Let's talk about it. And obviously there's more formal, robust ways to do this, but me, I'm a people person. So I was like, let me set up these meetings, right? And it's just like a crash course, a couple of months of me talking to the leadership committee, their direct reports, help me validate, here's the strategy, here's the direction we want to go in. Does this make sense? Does this resonate with you? What's the start, stop, continue of all of this, right? I'm a strong believer that people want to do good work. Like they want to come to work and they want to be successful. They want to do good work. And if leadership can help remove those barriers that are in the place of them doing their good work, you get people aligned very quickly. So I came in, had these conversations, went back to the leadership staff, went back to the CMO and said, here's what we're looking at. They coordinated as a group, came up with these 8 interconnected work streams, and then it was me to kind of help organize the working teams around this, because obviously it couldn't be a strictly top-down approach from that. The leaders would have been exhausted. They have day jobs to do. They're overseeing entire functions. So how do we execute around this, right? There's things we want to improve on. There's things we want to do. And here's the high-level strategy, but like, let's get people aligned to that. So that's when we kind of outsourced. It was kind of like a volunteer is too simple of a term, but that's really what it was, right? It's like, hey, let's communicate this high level strategy to the overall marketing business, what we're trying to achieve. Here are the work streams we're aligning to. Here's the overall goal for each of those work streams. Now, help us mobilize around each one of these. Like, we're not going to be prescriptive in the specific tasks that we want you to achieve. That's for you to figure out. But here are the goals we're trying to satisfy. And people really leaned into it, right, in a remarkable way. So now it became both a top down and a bottoms up, where it like met in the middle, and it was beautiful the way it all came together. So once we organized around these, we had specific working teams, all kind of spearheaded or had like a leadership sponsor associated with it. But the working teams were all like the individual contributors coming together, people who haven't, not part of the same team, people who haven't worked together, but like, hey, for example, like, hey, you're just a handful of people who are passionate about the culture work stream, right? And they have some really good ideas on what we can do to improve things like peer-to-peer feedback and the onboarding experience. And we let them do that. It's like, all right, come to the table with, like, if you have a good idea, come to the table and we will make sure that that idea gets an audience with the leaders. And if it's a really good idea and you have specifics on how you want to move that forward, we're going to bake that into the work stream. So we had a 12-month roadmap to kind of turn this hybrid of a top-down and a bottom-up approach into reality. And at the end of the day, we got most of the initiatives satisfied in like 8 to 10 months. It was beautiful. And a lot of it really came from that, getting the individual contributors aligned with the vision, with the with the high level expectations, without being prescriptive and here's the specific tasks. Like, it wasn't a transactional thing at all. It was, you are now a self-mobilized team. You're all, in theory, passionate about this thing that you volunteered to help improve. You're working on things that were your specific idea, right? I became just a light touch coordination on that, for me at that point, checking in with them regularly, leaning in on specific work streams that I also was passionate about, and just helping them execute towards this. And of course, like, it turned into high touch coordination, high stakes project management, whatever you want to call it at that point. But being able to, I don't want to say just sit back and watch it all unfold, while helping remove those barriers, while helping get these good ideas a solid audience. It was wonderful. It's just like one of those experiences that you don't see every day, and I was just happy to be a part of it. Yeah.
That approach, it just reminds me of a few of like the concepts I learned in like Six Sigma. Is like, one of the concepts in there is voice of the customer, and
Yeah.
and in the workplace, as leaders, our customers are our direct reports, and they want to have a say. It's easy to do top down initiatives. It's easy to say, this is great, this is wonderful, let's do this, but without understanding how it's going to affect the frontline employees, how it's going to affect
Right.
the direct reports. So I love that. I love that approach, the bringing the frontline groups together and really providing the feedback on how it really does impact them, and having their voice impact how the strategy is. It comes from the top down. Such a great approach. I love that. I love that. I
Yeah.
wish more organizations would do that. Would actually listen to the people that are on those front lines.
I mean, this was one of those perfect examples of, right, like, people are going to naturally resist any change that happens to
Mm.
them. But if there is change that they are a part of, right? If change is happening because of them, not to them, it's an entirely different mindset. right? And we just had to find a way to get people bought in with the strategy. Like that was the hard part, right? Taking that strategy, taking the goals, and turning that into something that people could um like that could resonate with them, that they can they can get passionate about. Like this, the organization I worked for was at the forefront, a digital services company at the forefront of the Gen AI boom at the time. So even as a marketing organization, we were pitching the idea like, hey, rather than resist this, start brainstorming ways that we could use Gen AI to make your jobs easier. People loved it. They rolled with it, and then it turned into a huge body of work also, right? And then, like I said, on the culture side of things, people think, hey, at the end of the day, people just want to feel empowered at work, right? Be able to collaborate, right? And have peers and friends at work. How can we enable that? Anyway, yeah.
Again, so important. Listening. I mean, we talk about change initiatives and everything, along the line. And we'll talk a little bit more about it later. But one of the main portions of change initiatives. I mean, I refer to the diffusion of innovation theory quite often, and generally those those laggards or those late adopters, you can get to them through exactly what you're talking about. Is having them be a part of it, having the collaboration there, having
Yeah.
them understand the why, having them understand like I know Gen AI is it's still a major topic now in the workplace, and I think
Yeah.
people are starting to kind of like buy into it a little bit more. But when it first started coming out, I mean, it's people people were nervous. Oh, it's going to take my job. It's going to do this, and we've seen that it's not necessarily the case. It's enhancing the jobs, and it's giving people an ability to learn a new skill. And a lot of people are starting to embrace that. They're starting to embrace it. Not all. I mean, I would say we're still in like the early adopter phase, and I still think we have some late adopters and some laggards that are going to be in there. But
Of
but
course.
I really think that we've moved into that early adopter phase.
Yeah.
Where you're starting to get some of these people that are starting to really just see what it can do to help them as opposed to replacing them. And I think a lot of that has to do with those initiatives that you're talking about in there, and like having those discussions, having them be a part of it, having them see what the overall strategy looks like, having them understand the whys. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so important in an organization, when communicating from the top down. It's not just a hey, this is what we're doing, just do what we say, and I'll give you as much information as I have, but that's all I have.
Yeah.
It's really getting them on board to be a part of it.
Yeah.
So I think that like that shift really from mandates to meaningful participation is huge. So
Yeah.
in your experience, what has to be in place for employees to want to own the change instead of resisting it?
Yeah. Um, I feel like we touched on this a little bit already, right? Yeah. Uh, it's getting them bought in, and that's not easy, right? Getting that buy-in, right? So, like, yeah, there's a ton of different, change models out there, right? Whether you align with Cotter's model or the ADKAR model, right? There's always that buy-in step you have to get. And there's different theories and different ways to go about it. Like in this particular example, right? It worked because it wasn't transactional in nature, right? Like, yes, the leaders, the CMO, and the direct reports, they were the ones kind of guiding that overall strategy. The ones who came up with the original. Here are the things that we absolutely need to stop doing, right? And here, but they left here are the things we need to start doing kind of open, right? And that was kind of the ask, where it's like, all right, now you as a working team, you tell us what we need to start doing, right? Identifying what we need to stop doing is the easy part. Identifying what we need to be doing instead and how we need to be doing it, that's the hard part. But in my experience, you take away the transactional nature of it. A lot of top-down initiatives, very transactional in nature. Here's a decision we've made. You need to go do it, and here's how you need to go do it, right? It's not really how human beings work, right? You give us a problem, we're going to want to solve it our way. Right. So the beauty of this example is that the leaders understood that, whether it was like the forefront of their mind or not, they leaned into it in a beautiful way and allowed these working teams to dictate here's the work we're going to do, right? Not everything turned into, yes, we're going to do that, right? Everything had to get a certain level of clearance. But like my strategy and all of it, I don't know if you've seen the movie, We Bought a Zoo, Matt Damon. I don't know if you've seen it. It's completely underrated film in my experience. But there's a line in it where it's like, hey, if you do something for the right reasons, nothing can stop you, right? And it's like kind of that has always carried with me in the work that I do. It's like, if it's a good idea, if it's something you want to do for a good reason, there's probably a way we can figure out to, to make this a reality, whether it's entirely grassroots or, right. Or, we got to go through specific approvals, but if it's a good idea, we're going to find a way, or at least give it an audience and, resonate it with people.
Yeah, I love that. I love the start. I love the start. Like, what should we
Lean into
start?
people's passions. I'm
Right,
sorry,
right.
Ken, right? But like,
No,
I could think that's the takeaway. You find what
yeah.
people are passionate about, you lean into that, and yeah,
So let me follow up with that a little bit, because I love the start approach. So for an organization that's not necessarily used to those types of approaches, where would be a starting point for them? Because I know we have a number of listeners here that are in organizations that have those top-down initiatives come down. Where would be a place that, let's say, an organizational development professional or even an IO psychologist or practitioner that's working in certain areas, where could be a place that they can start to have these particular conversations about this stop start approach?
yeah. I mean, I'm never gonna discourage anybody from setting up a robust employee listening program. And a lot of organizations, I don't want to say a lot, but there's some out there who don't do it at all. There's some out there who do it as a check the box kind of thing. And then there's some organizations that really lean into it because of the value you can get out of it. And I would imagine the audience, people listening into to this, probably understand that just as much as we do, like the value of a good employee listening program, right? There's different strategies to go about it, right? Especially nowadays with Gen AI leaning in, right? I've seen some places using more of a continuous, always on AI enabled chatbot type listening program, right? And then there's always the traditional, yearly surveys and pulse surveying strategies. So, we could talk for days and days and days about the ways to go about the employee listening program. But really, at the end of the day, it's, what do you do about that? Right? People will, and I think I mentioned this before, right? Like, strong believer that people want to do good work. You give them an opportunity to tell you what about their work is getting in the way of them being their best selves or doing their best work. They're going to tell you about it. Whether you just got to figure out a way how to package that up and listen in a quality way.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, it's, and that's such great advice for the listeners out there too. And I know, sometimes, for myself too, I've been in organizations where I've had to put my neck out, and
Yeah.
have those difficult conversations with executive leaders, and whether they were going to listen to me or not, or whether they were going to look at me as being, a disruptor, as a nice way of
Yes.
putting it, like, instead of a, POA, type of person. And I know, like, and in some organizations, it was received
Yeah.
that this is, what we need to do. We need to start listening. We need to start, getting those feedback loops. We need to start creating these committees. We need to start creating these working groups, have these focus groups. It was well received, and in other organizations, it was not. And those are
Yeah.
generally the organizations where I didn't last very, very long, because I'm a values driven person too. And again, my goal in the workplace is to make the workplace a better place. And if I
Right.
can't do that, based on my role or based on what I'm able to do, I have to really rethink what I'm doing within the organization. Some people get very comfortable, like they don't want to disrupt, they don't want to rock the boat at all. But I think those conversations at the upper level have to happen in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of getting the frontline employees, to be doing the best work that they can be doing based on what they see
Yeah.
on a daily basis,
Yeah.
and on a, let's say, on a customer transactional level,
Right.
what are the barriers? Where's the red tape? Where's all of that? that could be eliminated to make it a little bit easier for them. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, so I love that approach. I love that you're, kind of sharing that a little bit. And I love that, you're kind of telling letting everybody know like where to start, where they can
Yeah.
start.
I mean, if here's the thing, if there are people in the audience kind of looking for more of a grassroots way to start, local listening is still important, right? You don't have to,
Mhm.
you don't have to wait for some grand employee listening program, right? Yearly survey, make a big extravagant thing about it. That, those are great, valuable, informative, but listening absolutely can and should probably start at the local level.
Absolutely. And one of the other areas that individuals can start to listen and listen quietly without doing too much is through analytics. So I know, for example, when we, when the previous place I was working at, when we created the orientation process, what we did was we started to track, quietly. I started to track, what 6 month, the new hires, how many lasted for 6 months, how many lasted for 6 to 12 months, 12 to 24 months, and then 24 months and beyond. And we were able to see over a 3 year period, what the percentage was of employees that left before 6 months, what the percentage was. And then we
Yeah.
were able to narrow it down to manager. And now I was able to go into these meetings with data and to
Yep.
walk in and say, okay, I'm not just saying this to say this. This is what the data is telling me.
Yep.
These are some of the initiatives we need to have these conversations. And this is not to get anybody in trouble, but we need to figure out why these particular things are happening. And when you walk in with that data and you walk in with some information to back up what you're saying,
Yeah.
it makes it easier to have those deeper conversations.
Absolutely. So, Ken,
So,
like quick call back to the Dr. Irrelevant side of
mhm,
that, right?
mhm,
Some places I'd be able to go in and be like, "Hey, we're gonna follow the standard scientific method, observation, turn in a hypothesis, test it out," right? And other places are, "No, no, don't talk in that way, but, like, what we are gonna do is make those observations, quietly start forming a hypothesis, test it out in the data," right? And again, that's the value that any good people analytics, really analytics team at all, brings to the table. It's just helping you uncover those insights, right? Quietly, somehow getting it in the hands of, the decision makers, telling that story in such a way where it's compelling and they
mhm.
wanna take action on it. Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of different ways that you can have an impact.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, depending on the workplace culture and all of that, it's how you approach, based on how you think it's going to be received, I mean, everybody will know how their place of employment is. I mean, that's why, for a person like me as a consultant looking in, I don't know what the workplace culture is. I want to know what the workplace culture is, but I don't know. And that's how I know, like, I need to know, like, what is going on internally. So yeah, so you use a phrase, called light touch coordination.
Yeah.
And I kind of want to dig into that right now. So, in a world where leaders often default to control, how do you coach organizations to trust decentralized, self-led teams?
I mean, we've all worked for micromanagers, I'm sure, right? Yeah. And just kind of put out the question like, "How was that?" Right? Like, "Not great," right? And I alluded to this before too, just the difference between, like, transactional work and, and more strategic work. Um, and so I guess, like, the question is, like, how do we, right, navigate organizations more towards, like, this, like, an environment where you can satisfy or can operate more of a light touch place? It's, I would say, try not to be as prescriptive in what you're asking people to do, especially with big change initiatives like that, right? And there's always a place for it, right? Um, right? Think about how you're rolling out, like, a new piece of software or a new process, right? But I always encourage, I guess, like my clients and my employers, right? Think about it less in terms of like, what's the change we're trying to, change we're trying to go is not, the change isn't the new piece of software. The change isn't the new process. The change is the behavior that we want people to start doing, right? Um, think about like, new tech, new software, new hardware, things like that. That's easy, right? It's like, all right, we need you to stop using the old stuff. We need you to start using the new stuff. But there's ways to get people bought in around that, right? Articulate, what are you getting in the new environment versus the old environment, right? But like where I've seen organizations kind of fall flat is when they focus too heavily on what's the change versus why are we changing, right? Like I'm a behaviorist at heart, where like everything I do kind of boils down to what is the behavior that we're either observing, that we want to change, that we want to reinforce, right? And a lot of the change models I talked about before, there's always that reinforcement component in it, but it's always at the end of the change journey, right? Yeah, and it often always get overlooked because like measuring the reinforcement, measuring uh how well like that behavior is kind of instilled, like that's hard. Like psychometrics exists for a reason, and there's a reason why only a select few people are really good at it because it's hard. um but nonetheless it's still super important, right? So I always try to encourage, my clients, my employers, right? It's like think about less. It's like, yeah, oh, we need it, right? What's the change? Oh, we're doing a new piece of software. Like no, 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 no. That's the mechanism through which you're trying to encourage a new behavior. That's the mindset shift, right? Once you start getting people bought into that, the rest kind of starts to fall into place where it's like, oh, now we don't need to be as prescriptive in um, the specific like tasks, the specific things that have to happen that people naturally resist. And it turns more into, hey, here's what we're trying to encourage, right? And if you get people bought in and part of that journey, like we talked about before, that's where some of the real magic happens.
So would you recommend, let's say, for example, when you're rolling out a new piece of software, because with everything, there's the project management phase in there. So you have phase one, we're doing this, we're
Yeah.
going to look at different software programmers. Phase two, this. During that project management, or during those phases, would you recommend that like leaders or not necessarily leaders, but part of the part of the project actually has those behavioral, I hate to call them behavioral modifications, but those
Right.
behaviors kind of implemented throughout the phases, as opposed to, like you're saying, at the end, this is our outcome, and now this is the way we're gonna, have to behave based on this particular outcome.
Yeah, I mean, say why not? Right? There's always this
Yeah.
this myth that floats around, right? That every change, like 70% of change initiatives fall flat or aren't successful. And I know you and I had this kind of discussion before too. It's like, how real is that number? Right? Right. It's a number that everybody throws around, but like, is there research to back it up? I'm sure hopefully somebody in the audience will be like, yep, here's a meta-analysis, right? That kind of proves it or disproves it. I haven't gone that far into the rabbit hole, but I'm sure somebody else has, and I would love to hear about it. But um I think what you're describing is like, how do we measure success throughout and not just at the end, right? And obviously it's, there's no set in stone answer. It depends. We love that term in psychology. It depends, right? Are we talking right? Are we instilling a new software to encourage a new behavior? Are we starting a new policy or new process to encourage a new behavior, right? Uh, is there a new training program to encourage a new behavior, right? But to me, it's, all right, let's resonate, right? Like, not sorry, let's align rather with like what are the behaviors that we either want to stop doing or that we want to start doing. And I think you're right. Like if you start framing things in that way, there should be opportunities to start measuring that along the way and not just wait to the end of this however long change journey where people are exhausted. At least people on the change, people acting as change agents are exhausted or either ill-equipped to be measuring things in that way. Or to be more practical, if you wait to the very end, you've already lost your opportunity to start measuring these things along the way. You almost
Right.
lose your ability to track whether it's successful or not if you keep that step absolutely towards the end and you don't bake it in from a project management perspective from the very start. Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree in there. So I'm going to actually kind of lean into the 70%. Um, we talked about that that this the 70% failure rate in change initiatives, and
Right.
it's kind of hinted that it might be more myth than truth. And I know you started to unpack it a little, but what is really the more relevant question I want to ask is what's really the danger in clinging to that narrative?
Like, in my opinion, the idea that a change initiative can be unsuccessful is false. Like that, right? Like to me, and again, I don't know if it's my background, my experience, but like I'm a strong believer that um, everything's a learning experience. And again, yeah, I mean, a lot of school, right? A lot of school, and a strong believer, right? Like a null hypothesis, like yes, a null finding rather is still a finding. You still learn something. It might not be what you sought out to learn. It might not be what you sought out to achieve, but you still achieved something. You still learned something. So, right, like this myth, we'll call it, until somebody emails me and says no. Like, here's the evidence. This myth, we'll call it, that 70% of change initiatives are unsuccessful. I was like, change your mindset, right? I'm sure there was something successful about it, right? If something you learned, and if not, if you really, along this entire journey, you learned nothing about your workforce, you learned nothing about what they value, you learned nothing about how to operationalize things in a better way, right? Then genuinely, you got to rethink a lot about the way you're running your business. But I think if you stop and really think about, like, no, right? So, yes, if we came out of the gate and here's what our success metrics were, and either we failed to come up with good measurement instruments for those up front, or we just ignored the step entirely and we can't measure success in the end, right? That's irrelevant, almost irrelevant to the fact it's like, well, what did you achieve? Right?
Yeah, and I love that too. And the when I was looking at that question too, I was thinking about it and just looking at it that, if you go into a team goes into or organization goes into a change initiative with the understanding that's with 70% air quotes, 70% of the time you're going to be, it's going to fail.
You're setting yourself
They
up for failure. You're getting that
right,
in your
right.
mind.
It's
Yeah.
the changing that mindset, and that's why I look at I'm a statistics person. I love sports, so that's why I look at baseball. You know, a batter that bats 300 is considered a successful batter. Bats 300, does really really well, can potentially, if they have a long career, get into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Being quote unquote successful 3 out of 10 times, not failing 7 out of 10 times, but being successful
Right.
3 out of 10 times. And
I
it's
love that. Yeah.
it really is, looking at that, if you're walking in saying, oh, 70% of the change initiatives they fail, then you walk in saying, okay, well, we have a 7 in 10 chance that this is not going to be successful, as opposed to a 3 in 10 chance. But those other 7 in 10 chances going exactly where you're saying is yes, they might not have been successful, but why wasn't it successful? And where can we learn from? I
Right.
hate using the word failures, but where do we learn from our our non-successes, or where
Yeah.
we were unsuccessful? Where do we learn from that? And
Yeah.
that's how organizations continue to grow. They continue to innovate. They
Yeah.
continue to find new leaders that might have, like stepped up on these particular projects, that, provided some insights and
Yeah.
feedback, and going all the way back to what you were saying earlier with, those frontline committees, and the start option in there is like, okay, well, maybe we were doing it just from a change initiative, just from a top down, and it didn't resonate with the employees, or it didn't resonate with the,
Yeah.
if you're, let's say, retailer, you have customers, it didn't resonate with the customers. What do we do to change that? How do
Yeah.
we approach this differently?
I mean, it's different than that, Ken, too, right? Like,
Yeah,
so some organizations lean into the fail fast kind of idea better than others. It's not for everybody, right? It's different, different strokes for different folks, right?
with
Some organizations don't have the luxury of a fail fast culture or a fail fast way of operating. Healthcare organizations, for example, right? But like when you're, working in like the digital space, digital services space, or high tech, right? Yeah. The organization probably should really lean into that fail fast kind of culture where people are allowed to take risks
mm,
and try something out. Because like worst case scenario, it didn't work. But what about it did work? And how can we bake that into the next iteration, right? The next sprint, right?
So one of the things that that we kind of need to stop thinking about, and you said this before in conversations, is this thinking about change as a one and done initiative.
Oh
So
yeah.
what would it look like if if we treated change as a capability, something continuous and evolving instead of episodic?
I love this, Ken. Right. So, um, I don't remember where I first heard this analogy. It was probably at PsyOp or some other conference, and it was in a different context entirely. And I kind of adopted it for change. But like we've all played with, like, there's that. It's a children's toy, Newton's Cradle, is it called? Right? We've all seen it's like that toy that has the different balls on a string, and you drop, right. You drop the ball on one side, and the momentum and the energy carries through and bounces the ball up on the other side. And then that ball comes back. And, in a world of, perpetual motion, right, it would never stop. But when does it stop? Right? When the momentum from one direction loses steam. Right. So the analogy that I've kind of adopted is this, aligns very much with my career and just the way my, the direction my career's gone into also, which is you have the people analytics teams or the analytics teams or the insights teams, the consultants, whoever's helping you generate those insights, right? They're working in one direction, right? But they're coming in and they're helping you diagnose the problem, right? They're observing. We talked about this too, right? Maybe that first ball is I'm observing the current state. Then I'm hypothesizing, right? I'm observing the current state. Then I'm hypothesizing. Then I'm creating an analysis. I'm deriving some insights, and I'm packaging up those insights to the stakeholders or the decision makers, right? And that's the direction that team goes in, right? But where a lot of organizations lose steam is now picking up the momentum on the other side, where the operations teams pick that up. And now they're like, oh, we're taking these action recommendations and we're turning it into project plans, actual reasonable changes that we can make. We're working through this change, we're measuring the success of it, and then you finally work your way back to exactly where you started, which is all right, now let's reassess the current state. So like in an ideal world of continuous motion, right, the effort goes in on one side, right? And throughout this time, there's the analytics teams and the operations teams working in tandem. Sometimes they're working separately, but like the effort goes in on one side, works its way through that life cycle. The insights get now turned into here's what we want to do about it. Momentum carries in the other way. And in an ideal world, it's the analytics teams and the operations teams working closely together to have this state of continuous motion or continuous change, right? Um, how often does that happen in reality though? Right? I mean, like, right? So I've worked as part of people analytics teams, I've led people analytics teams, I've worked on the operations side. They don't talk, right? Like,
Right.
right? Not directly most of the time, right? And I feel like that's the secret sauce that a lot of organizations are missing out on. Is like getting those teams closer, not necessarily in proximity, but like just more closely aligned with, you know, how we are informing what change needs to happen versus how that change is actually happening, right? You solve for that. Hopefully somebody someday will figure out that perpetual motion machine.
Yeah. Yeah, and you touch upon in there, this level of communication, and I hear it throughout organizations, all over. One of the biggest challenges they have is that communication, and how if we, as an organization, as departments, as whatever, if we actually talk to each other and actually had conversations and gave updates and did what we are supposed to do, and it make those change initiatives flow better.
Yeah.
And I know for even one thing that I just want to touch upon with the change initiatives too. The reason why it's the change initiatives are never one and done. Once you hit those outcomes, that's really when learning and development comes in. That's when
Yeah,
organizational development comes in, because they have to continue to provide the support to the change that has just occurred.
exactly.
Because we can't assume that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing and that everybody is still on board with this.
Yeah.
So that's where the training comes in, the support. Again, that comes from operations. It comes from the strategy, and everybody has to continue to be on board with what needs to get done. So the change initiative is never done. Actually,
Yeah.
the change initiative is, yes, you might have reached your intended outcome, but now there's a whole set of work that needs to get done
Yeah.
afterwards to ensure that that is sustained in
Sustained,
there.
right?
So,
And not just sustained, right? You
mhm.
get back to ground, you get back to ground zero. It's like, all right, now reassess the current state, right? Exactly. Did we achieve what we intended? If not, what did we learn, right? Reassess and get right back into it. Yeah.
So we kind of just touched upon a little bit about the sustainability. In terms of like people, when OD and L&D comes in once the outcomes are achieved with those change initiatives. But we don't talk a lot about sustainability. So we do talk a lot about transformation. So so for you, like how do you know when a change effort is actually sticking, and what signs tell you that it's still surface level?
Yeah. A lot of it starts from the very start of like the change initiative, right? When you start talking to people who are like, all right, here's the change that we want to instill, you could tell almost immediately whether it's a surface level change or if this is like an actual, like an actual sustainable, culture change that we're trying to achieve. And most of the time, there's like telltale signs of this is surface level when they start talking about timelines, right? And don't get me wrong, like I'm an expert project manager in my own right, but if people start out of the gate talking about timelines, when is this going to be done? You can almost tell immediately this is a surface level thing. They're not really focused on long term behavior change. They're focusing on getting one, like satisfying one thing. They're looking to check that box. And hey, listen, that's part of it. But like when sometimes when I hear it's like right out of the gate, let's talk about timelines. You know, commit when it's going to be achieved by. It's that to me is always a big red flag and determining whether or not it's a surface level change or if the organization, the stakeholders are really committed to ongoing and lasting and change. Like you alluded to this before in one of the previous questions we had. It's like, when does learning and development get involved? How are we measuring success? How are we reinforcing the change? Right. That's how. Right. When they start talking in ways like that, okay, right? This is probably going to be more of a sustainable thing, right? We're thinking and we're strategizing up front how we are going to um, measure the change that's happening, how we are going to reinforce it over time, how we are going to reevaluate, right? Anybody comes out of the gate and says, all right, what's the plan to reevaluate all of this 6 months down the line, 12 months down the line? Then oh, okay, now we're getting somewhere, right? Now it's not just, now I can tell it's not just a one and done that you're going after. And this is something that you really value, right? And again, I've talked about this before, right? Behaviorist, right? Almost everything I do, I tie back to individual human behavior, right? How are we changing that, right? If there's something we want to stop, something we want to start, right? How are we reinforcing that behavior, right? So some of those telltale signs where it's like I want to do a thing and I want to do it by this date and time, and if it's not done by that date and time, then it's unsuccessful. Okay, this is a surface level thing. Yeah, we could still we could still get that done for you, right? And maybe hopefully along the way kind of change some hearts and minds. I've been in those positions also where you start challenging the mindset of some of the stakeholders and like, hey, maybe we could start thinking about this in a different way, open up a different body of work, kind of getting them thinking about these long term, in a more long term and sustainable way. But it's not always the case.
And I know that there's one of the major, leadership programs that are out there, and they talk about like change initiatives, and they talk about consistently disrupting the status quo. And,
Yeah.
once you reach the status quo, then it becomes like another change initiative is going to be in there. I won't mention the company because I don't want to give them free advertising, but that's one of their things. That's one of the pillars that they present to leadership. Like these change management initiatives are part of disrupting the status quo.
Yeah.
And we are perpetually, with technology, with with the maybe state of the world, maybe business, maybe economy, maybe whatever it might be, we are in this constant state of having to pivot, of having to challenge the status quo, of having to do this
Yeah.
to stay relevant. I mean, we look at, the larger tech companies out there, and you look at what they looked like 30 years ago, and you look at the companies that have kind of disappeared over in that 30-year period that didn't challenge the status quo. And I
Yeah.
mean, we always give the perfect example of Blockbuster.
I was gonna
I mean,
say, Ken, I was gonna say, rest in peace, Blockbuster. Like it's part of my
so there's
childhood
one.
that is
There's
just
one
gone.
location, and I think the one location is up in like Washington or Oregon or one of those places.
Oh.
One location, and they're still there. And
No, but
I,
you
I
nailed it. I mean, like Blockbuster's like the classic example where
right,
they
right,
just
you
maintain
know,
the status quo. They had something beautiful for such a long time. And you
right.
ask, so many of us older millennials,
No,
right? Friday night
no,
at Blockbuster was where it's
that was,
at,
that was,
right?
that was the night.
That was
That was
right. Friday night, you
singular
start
night.
your Friday night at Blockbuster, and you knew
Yeah,
it was going to be a good weekend. And now
yeah,
they're gone because they just didn't. And there's countless case studies. I heard a rumor that they had an opportunity to buy Netflix at one point, right? But you're right? Just maintaining the status quo is just never an option.
we're talking about change, and we're talking about this, that companies and organizations are in perpetual change. Like
Yeah,
it's never, yes, you have a change initiative that you have, but that doesn't mean that is the end of that change. There might be more that's coming down. I mean, we look at classically right now, we look at Gen AI as being part of the workforce, and how that has majorly disrupted the many different industries, including organizational development, including IO psychology, including recruitment and different HR functions in there, and focuses on training and different,
yeah,
and recruitment in organizations has changed drastically over the last 5 years. Train changed drastically,
yeah,
and it's again continuously evolving in there. So change is not, this one and done initiative. Change is indefinite, because what we do today will look different in 2030. What we do in 2030 is going to look different in 2050. Like it's
yeah.
just going to look different, you know. So yeah. So we're gonna close out here,
Yeah.
Jason. And so I want to ask you, if you have had to leave the listeners with a sentence or phrase that captures how you approach change, something they can carry into their own work, what would it be?
It's I gotta be honest, I didn't really have a great answer to this before we started talking. But as like throughout the conversation that we were having just now, like it just, it kind of dawned on me, right? Like, we talk about the human side of this work, right? And, why we kind of got into this field, IO psychology, why we're passionate about it, right? And I just think about like this humans in general. Like one of the beautiful things about being human is like this ability to hold two opposing ideas in your head at the same time. And we just kind of talked about this, right? So like, for example, like me, all the time, I value stability. Like I have in my head where it's just like, I don't want anything to change from right now. But at the same time, my brain is also telling me that in order to preserve that in order to preserve that stability, I need to change. Right. And it's just like this crazy concept that, right, you have to, right, whether you're aware of it or not, you're kind of constantly making this mental calculation of what do I have to change so that I can maintain my current level of stability. And it's like just the idea of that is uh, right? I think it came out with the Blockbuster example. Um, and it's like that's kind of how I approach the work, right? Where it's like, yeah, the goal is to, maintain what we have. But in order to do that, we have to change with the environment. We have to change with the economy. We have to change with the latest trends, the latest tools and technology. And that's how we're going to remain competitive as individuals. That's how we're going to remain competitive as a business, right? And maintain, you know, this level of stability, this level of comfort that we have. So it's just, don't forget about the human side of things, right? And that it's okay to have these opposing ideas in your head, right? It's okay to value stability, but also acknowledge that change is a constant. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And then I feel like the other piece that we talked about early on in the conversation is just this top down versus bottoms up approach to change. Doesn't have to be one or the other, right? It can absolutely be both, right? Both top down and bottoms up. And in my experience, some of the most successful change programs that I've personally been a part of have found that balance. But we'll leave you with that.
Dr. Jason Guttadauria, Dr. Irrelevant, thank you so much for those final words. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to many more conversations with you, and looking forward to many more different hat displays that you're gonna have there. So thank you so much for being here today and being a guest on the show.
You got it, Ken. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Unboxing OD and listening to today's conversation with Dr. Jason Guttadauria, Dr. Irrelevant, with a perspective that feels both grounded and sharp in the best way. I loved where we landed, especially this idea that change can hold two truths at once. We want stability, and we change to protect it. We want direction, and we create space for ownership. That tension is part of the work. If you would like to connect with Jason and follow his work, head to LinkedIn. His contact information is in the show notes, so you can reach out directly and keep the conversation going. And if you want to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn as well. Send a message, tell me what stood out, and let me know what topics you want to hear next on Unboxing OD.